All right, here I am staring at my phone and my laptop, and we're live as far as I can tell. So I am so sorry that we had technical issues, but I don't know, it's one of those days. We did a live in here at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and had a few issues then, but got them ironed out, and seemed like everything was going to be all systems go, and then here at 7:10, ran into the same issues all over again. So let's get rolling on this, and we'll run 10 minutes extra at the end to give you your money's worth. So today, Tyler's running the camera, Sam is behind the scenes, the great and powerful Oz, running everything else, and Jenny is over here waiting to do my bidding, right, at the drop of a hat or something, and Vita the dog is walking around here too. So let's roll with questions. RFA says, I'd like to make panels with a edge bevel that is 1.5 inches wide. Must I use a router bit that is 3 inches, or is there another way to get a 2-inch bit to give me a 1.5 inch edge? I'd like to not use a 3-inch bit if possible. So let's do this. I'll draw. Draw! What you can do, whoops, sorry, can't grab a felt tip. There we go. What you can do to get a little more squeeze out of a router bit, a little more profile. So let's say we've got bevel router bit, and it's got a ball bearing on it. So one of the things you might be able to do is, if you have a fence on your router table, which you should, you could take the ball bearing off and then use the fence to control the horizontal depth of cut. And when the bearing is off, the edge of your material, let's draw that without a bearing. Having this bearing off would let the edge of your material project past it. So what you would have to do is do cut number 1, like this, and then you can move the fence back. You'll have to adjust the height of the cutter and make another cut that would allow this angle to get further down the board as you climb up the bit, as you use the higher part of the cutter, with this corner projecting past where the bearing was. So theoretically, yes, it's got to be done on a router table, because it's the fence then that has to control your position. So that should work. Richard says, do you consider plywood a more stable sheet good than melamine and MDF when it comes to making cabinets? When I see cabinets in box stores made from melamine and MDF, they look like they won't hold up over time. Tiny particles go in. Plywood probably is more durable than anything. So MDF and melamine are in the particle board family, chipboard. OSB is in the same family, except OSB has huge, like, flakes the size of my hand in it. Particle board has particles in it. So from strictly a durability perspective, if you're going to make something that's going to get banged around, I'd rather it be plywood than something in the particle board family. For kitchen cabinets, man, I have built so many cabinets out of melamine, including my shop cabinets. I just don't see what's in there that's going to fail. Once they're hanging on the wall, I don't know where that system would go south, because all they're doing is hanging on the wall. Anything that's going to get handled a lot, you know, a box you're going to put in the back of your pickup truck with tools in it, I would much rather that be plywood. Mark asks, any reason to not use Titebond 3 for everything? Dollars, money. Titebond 3, I think, is the most expensive of the original 2 and 3. It's because it's waterproof, it's going to cover all your needs. It's just a more expensive product. But no, if you want to do every bit of your woodworking with 3, that's fine. And speaking of Titebond, by the way, thanks to Titebond for sponsoring this and keeping this event live for you. John asks, any concerns when using a palm sander or orbital sander as to sanding with the grain? So here's the deal. A bunch of years ago, a lot of years ago, I did a tool test for American Woodworker magazine. I tested 26 random orbit sanders. Talked to a lot of people about their use. And a lot of people said, hey, Ginny, could you, never mind, I have one right here. So I've got in my hot little hands, I've got a random orbit sander. So a lot of, including manufacturers, recommended that the grain in this workbench top is going this way, that I go with the grain, come back with the grain, go up with the grain, come back with the grain, allowing each pass to overlap the previous pass by half the width of the pad. It's weird to me. So I appreciate the recommendation, but it's weird to me because the whole deal with a random orbit is that it's randomly orbiting. It's spinning, but it is also oscillating. So I don't understand the difference between going with the grain and just going willy-nilly. In all honesty, in my woodworking, you know, probably 30% of the time I remember that recommendation and I travel with the grain. The other 70% I go wherever the sander takes me. And I don't see any visual difference between work that I've sanded in one direction or work I've sanded willy-nilly. So I don't think it matters going with the grain or not. Scott says, I made a bench for the kiddos bus stop, very nice. After 2 years of setting out in Colorado, I noticed the paint was coming off. I used Kills Latex Exterior Water-Based Primer and a good exterior paint. Should I have used a different material? What did you bake it out of? One of the things you got to be careful with is if it was built out of treated lumber, it takes about a year for all the stuff, all the chemicals in treated lumber to completely wick off of the lumber. So it can be frustrating, you know, if you build a deck out of treated wood and then you want to stain it or paint it or whatever, you really got to wait a long time for all of this stuff to wick out of it. So that would be my first thing, is if it was treated lumber and you painted it fast, that may have caused it to peel. Whatever it was made out of, it's got to be really, really dry. If there's moisture trapped in the wood and you put paint on the surface, that moisture will cause everything to flake off. Should I have used a different material? I don't know, because you didn't tell me what material you used. If you're still watching, Scott, let us know what material you made it out of. If you're using, you know, cedar or conventional pine, the procedure you followed is the same thing I would have done. It should have been fine. Thomas asks, any opinion on a down shear flush trim versus a straight flush trim? So yeah, let's talk about, in fact, we can show this. Ginny, I would send you for router bits, but I don't know. Let me go get router bits so we know what we're talking about. Because I don't think I can send you, I don't think you know what I want.
Fill the dead air. Fill the dead air.
Because I'm not sure I know what. Go entertain the crowd, Ginny or George or somebody. Hello, Joe.
So, we got into the dog here, and we are going to be showing you how to properly give your dog wooden armor. You know, when your dogs are getting into dog fights, you want to make sure that everyone is safe, they're not actually getting harmed. It's like a sparring match. We're going to build our dog today a wooden helmet. It's gonna be adorable, it's going to be functional, it's going to be aerodynamic. They're going to go faster than you've ever seen before. If you tune into TN's engineering side, they can teach you how to build rockets.
All right, so
that's all for today.
Didn't know you were going to get a bench dog out of this, did you? Peter, can you try to relax, please? Please try to relax. Okay. So I'm going to have you, Tyler, come in. Not you personally. I'm going to set it there, and as tight as you can get on that. So, shear. When you look at this router bit, are you there?
Yep.
see how this carbide is not straight up and down. It's at a shear angle. So router bits like this cost more than router bits that have carbide in them that's straight. You can come back out now. But if you think back, at some point in your life, if you were taught to use a hand plane, the teacher may have said, instead of just going straight with the plane, skew it, hold it at just a little bit of an angle, and then you get a shear cut. So the same is true with those router bits. When we have a router bit that's got a shear angle on it, it's going to give us a better surface finish than a router bit that has just got carbide straight up and down. So, Thomas, long answer to your question. My opinion on a shear versus straight is pay the extra money, get the shear bit, and you're going to get better cut quality on your work. Walt says, I found Titebond 3 doesn't set when gluing end grain. The best glue is Titebond gel. Yeah, gluing end grain in general is tough. They've got a newer glue. And when I'm doing anything with end grain, this is the one I use now. It's called Quick and Thick. So doing anything with end grain, this could be a mitered picture frame, where of course on the miters we're putting end grain together. It could be when I put a face frame together and I'm gluing the end grain of my rail to the long grain of my stile. So this Thick and Quick I have found is a good choice for that because it's extra thick. It's quite a bit, its viscosity is quite a bit thicker than conventional glue, and as a result it doesn't soak into the end grain so much and you get a better bond. James Bond. Cindy says, I recently started working and looking for a workspace. What's the smallest space I would need for building furniture? Tiny? I don't know. I did a lot of work at one point in what was barely a one-car garage. It was about, 10 feet, maybe 10 feet wide, maybe 20 feet deep, 200 square feet total. So that was a pretty small space, but I would just, and looking for workspace. So yeah, I would say that's not a bad place to start. We did a big, there was a woodworking survey done a bunch of years ago, and the average shop space in this country was like 225 square feet, 250 square feet. And if you think about it, what that is a single car garage, 10 by 25. So that's pretty common. So somewhere in that neighborhood, a couple hundred square feet would be a good starting point. Gary says, I'm going to make a router table. Do you have any plans? And do you have any suggestions to make a great router table? One of my focuses will be on dust collection. Well, that sucks. Also, after many years doing this, I have a slew of router bits. Good for you. So I need drawers. I don't have a router table plan. Suggestions. What I did with my router table here is I bought a commercially made top. I bought a commercial top, a commercial fence, and a router lift, and then I built the base cabinet. I'm with you on the drawer idea. I think having at least 2 drawers in there, not just for router bit storage, but you've got router bit wrenches, you've got, if you put in a router lift, you've got the mechanism, the wrench for that, the jack for that. So there's a lot of stuff to store. So good idea on the router table, on the drawers. Weight is good, not imperative, but this would be a good place to use MDF or melamine because you've got some good mass there to just keep everything sitting still. Casters are a must for me. I put everything in my shop on casters. Dust collection, yeah, I don't know. So I still struggle with the fact that although I connect dust collection to my fence, I still get a lot of stuff that falls into the area below, which if you're in a cabinet, that means you're filling the cabinet with dust. We just got, let's go this way, Tyler. Just got a brand new router table. We're going to come to this black router table here. Maybe you can just shoot over the lathe. So in the world of dust collection, let me face you when I'm talking to you. In the world of dust collection, this is going to be my first experience with this, which is router table, dust collection in the fence, but then this box, when you're running the router, you close this and there's a 4-inch dust port on the back. So you're actually picking up dust out of this space. And this might be something you want to consider, Gary. There are companies that make these boxes aftermarket that you can put on anybody's router table. And it makes a lot of sense to me because so much stuff ends up down here below the router. Like I said, even though I run dust collection on the fence all the time, a lot of stuff ends up down here. So we actually haven't run this yet. George just got this thing put together, George, like 3 days ago. So we haven't even made a cut with it yet. So I have no report on dust collection, but we'll let you know as it goes. But I'd consider adding one of those below the table boxes. David says, got a Festool domino coming, attaboy. When to use a domino versus a mortise and tenon joint. Let's get her moved before she does something silly like jump and break a leg, and we're all going to be unhappy. I never cut mortise and tenon anymore now that I've got a domino. I really would say it's a 1-to-1 replacement with a mortise and tenon joint. It's you just go ahead and use the domino any place you would use a traditional mortise and tenon. John is in Middleton, Ohio. Thomas is in Tacoma. David's in Central Florida. Alfonso in Columbia. All right, just keep scrolling here. Boy, that's good. Arkansas, Houston, New Hampshire. We've got a widespread map today. I'm still scrolling. There's a lot of people are just saying hello, so I'm getting past that. Oh. All right, so a lot of people are saying they can't see it. Sam, can you just put a message on there that tells people they need to refresh? And if they're on the GOA site, they need to refresh if they're still not seeing anything. And then a couple people have mentioned they're watching on YouTube, and a reminder that if you're watching on YouTube, I don't monitor the questions there. I look at them all on GOA.com. So if you're on YouTube and you want to post a question, you've got to go to WWGOA.com, upper left-hand corner, videos, click that, drop-down menu, WWGOA Live, click that. This is October, you can post your question there. Eric says, any thoughts on heating a shop in Western Washington on the coast where it is really humid but not that cold in the winter? I'm thinking a mini split heat pump. Does that seem reasonable? You know, I'm not familiar with these splits. Until I helped April with her shop in Texas, I had never heard of a split, so I actually don't know what that is. My thing is, as much as possible, I want to avoid open flame when heating a shop. So in my old shop, the furnace was in the building, and I had what was called a closed combustion natural gas furnace. So just like the name implies, the combustion chamber was completely enclosed, so I didn't have to worry about fumes or dust or anything. In this building, the furnace is up on the roof. So I'm not your best answer for this. I think that I would talk to a number of HVAC people, Eric, and get a lot of opinions, and maybe, you know, call a couple of other woodworking shops and ask them what they're using. Like I said, I'm not familiar with what the split is. I know people that have put them in, but I don't know what the technology is. Steve says, recommended glue for lignum vitae. Lignum vitae is uber oily. So if you're going to glue it to something else, I would first wipe it down with naphtha, is a solvent you can get from a home center. That'll get the oil off the surface. And then oily wood like that, really your best choice would be, Ginny, can you go, I think there's a type-on polyurethane glue where all the glues are under the clamps there. A polyurethane glue would be a good choice for that application. It's a dark, I think it's a black bottle. It'll say polyurethane right on the lid, on the face. Geez, I think we went through this last time. Not there? All right, you'll have to trust me. So I think polyurethane glue would be a good choice for an oily surface like a tropical wood. But still, even though you're using polyurethane glue, clean it first. David is in Coleman, Wisconsin. I know Wisconsin pretty well. I don't know where that is. And keep up the great broadcast. Thank you, sir. John says, what do you consider the minimum hardware requirements to set up a shop? Yeah, great question. So one, if you go on GOA, WWGOA.com, and upper right-hand corner, there's a search window, and type in there starter tools, first tools, anything in that genre. And we've done quite a bit on this. I'm going to say you can't go wrong with a table saw because that's really the heart of the shop. A router table is really high on my list because you can use a router table as a jointer, and a jointer is also high on my list. So you get a lot of versatility out of a router table because we can use it as a router table. You can take the router out and use it handheld. We can use it as a jointer. So I would put that in like slot number 2 or 3. I use my bandsaw a lot, but that's probably a little idiosyncratic to my woodworking. But I also find that to be a real versatile tool, so I put that high on the list. But somewhere in there, a good random orbit sander, handheld router, maybe a biscuit joiner, so in the category of portable power tools. What am I missing there? Cordless drills. So there's a starting point. Did I spend enough of your money for you? Gary says, which downey would you use more, the 500 or the 700? I use the big one is the XL, right? And the little one is not the XL. I use the littler one more because I'm primarily working in 3/4 and 1.5 inch stock. Most of what I'm doing is joining a 3/4 inch thick rail to an 1.5 inch thick blade, and doing that typically with a 10 millimeter domino, and the small domino will handle that. So it isn't until I get into bigger scale stuff where I'm joining like 1.5 inch material, then I go to the XL. It's good to look at what their capabilities are, because I think the XL comes down in size further than the little one goes up in size. In other words, I think I can use the big one on some thinner stock. The littler one doesn't really help me on 1.5 inch stock because the tenons aren't that big. So it'd be worth exploring that before you pull the trigger. But in the end, I use the smaller of the two the most. Williams enjoying the cordless tool cabinet? Good, glad you are. It's been fun so far. Clesson asks, the size of my shop. Shop is 3,600 square feet total. There's 3,200 square feet in this main part where we are now, and then there's a 2-car unheated attached garage, which is primarily material storage for me and or working on the children's cars periodically. That's over here, that's another 400 square feet. Can I top coat a piece with poly after applying Watco? Finishing questions, if I don't 100% know the answer, I don't like to answer, and I'm not 100% sure on this. What I would do is look at whatever poly you're going to buy. If you're going to buy Minwax polyurethane, then I would go online and find a phone number for customer service for Minwax and say, I'm going to put down Watco Danish oil. Can I apply poly over the top? If the answer is yes, how long do I have to let it flash? How long do I have to let the oil cure before the poly goes on? Can I use water-based poly or only oil-based poly? I'd really prefer getting that one answered by the experts at a finishing company, because I don't want to lead you down a primrose path there. Mike says, hello from Wisconsin. Thanks for showing the walnut table on Instagram. What would be a good spray paint for painting a project? Don't have an HVLP gun and want a smooth, brush-free finish. So then I don't know what you mean, a good spray paint. So I'm spraying just conventional latex paint through my HVLP. If you're talking about like a rattle can of paint, I don't know, I'm not real brand specific when I buy this. I guess walking into Home Depot, I'm probably primarily buying Rust-Oleum rattle cans of paint, but that's uber subjective. It's a good way to get paint on so that you don't have to brush it, so you don't end up with brush strokes. Is use a rattle can instead of a brush, if that's what you mean. So Rust-Oleum is just kind of accidentally the paint I buy the most. Any tricks for removing the paper on double-sided tape? Yeah, don't play guitar, because playing guitar means you have to keep your fingernails really short, and then you can't pick the paper off of double-faced tape. Yeah, I struggle with it because my fingernails are really short because I do play guitar. But you can also use a utility knife, the sharp edge of a utility knife, to get it started, and that helps a lot. Tim says, in your videos that include using a pattern and a bandsaw, you saw to trace the pattern, cut close to the waist side of the line, and then sand to the line. If you have a pattern, why wouldn't you reattach the pattern after cutting close? And then, so I usually do. So so the thing to keep in mind, Tim, is depending on what you're looking at, I've shot about 130 woodworking DVDs, and one of the things I do try to do is show different approaches. So if somebody doesn't own a router bit, or a flush trim router bit, an alternative approach, here's what I'm thinking I was probably thinking, is that for somebody who doesn't own a setup that allows them to flush trim, you can trace the pattern, cut close, sand to the line. But you're right, 99.9% of my time, I'm gonna cut close to the line and then use the pattern to flush trim. That is the way to go, as far as I'm concerned. Want to build an outdoor patio bench, do it on the economical side. What do you recommend for lumber? I'm in Los Angeles, so we see a lot of sun, but not much rain. Well, you can do outdoor furniture in pine, just paint it. Recommend how to finish it. So yeah, a good paint, and this is a place where, home centers are good. Specialty stores like Sherwin-Williams. I know there are others out there, but I'm just in my area, I primarily use Sherwin-Williams. To walk in there and say, okay, here's the deal. I'm going to build this patio bench. I'm going to build it out of pine. I want to paint it, or I want to stain it and top coat it, or I want to. And what's nice about that is if they're in your area, they know your weather conditions so well, and they're going to be able to give you really, really good advice. However, paint would be a good choice. If you want it to look like wood when you're done, stain it, and then some form of polyurethane. If you want it to be uber durable under finish, spar varnish is a very durable polyurethane designed to be outside. It's what's used on boats. So it's really, 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 really durable. Spar, S-P-A-R, spar varnish. Craig says, my wife wants me to assemble a mountain dulcimer kit. What glue would you recommend? My guitar kits, I've always been putting them together with yellow glue, and I know I'm breaking a few luthier rules there. Hide glue would be the super traditional glue for putting instruments together. And the reason for that is if something ever goes wrong with the instrument and you need to take it apart, you can very easily reverse hide glue with heat and steam. So yellow glue is very tough to reverse. I think I've had fine luck. I guess with the guitar kits I've made, and I've made dozens, I've never had to take them back apart. So I've been maybe just lucky that way. I'd call the kit company and see what they say. But if it were me, I'd probably just, the thing with hide glue is the tack time is slow. And so maybe I'm just impatient. And that's the primary reason I stick with yellow glue for my guitars. Eric, if you're still watching, David is providing a little bit of answer for you here on your mini split. Oh, you've already seen it? Sammy says, what do you think about applying glue to end grain, waiting about 5 minutes, and then apply glue to both parts of the joint? Yeah, that's a good, basically what you're doing there, it's called sizing the wood. You're using the glue as a sealer and brushing that onto the end grain first, and then going back and doing your gluing. So that's not a bad idea. And I got to think a second. I think if you're going to do that, they actually recommend that you dilute the first coat glue about 50% before you brush it on. But I would Google that information, or I would give Type On a call and ask them. But I'm pretty sure that for the sizing step, you dilute the glue by half, and then you use it full strength for the regular glue up. Bob says, Sam, did you see this? Bob is saying there's something wrong with the GOA site. Let me look here a second, because I'm on it. That's where I'm seeing your questions. It's loading. Yeah, it's playing. So I think I just refreshed my page, Bob, and everything was smurferific. So you maybe need to just refresh. All right. Cleston says, how much CNC work are you doing for patterns and or parts? We're running the CNCs a fair bit in here. We've got some stuff jobbed out, a little bit of stuff jobbed out to other people that we're doing. So, I don't know, in my 80-hour week, what percentage, George, are we running the CNCs? George works for me. Probably
60, 70.
You think that high? Well, you're only here 2 days a week, so in the
When I'm here.
yeah, when George is here, he's my CNC feeder. So yeah, when he's here, it's 70% of the time because I rely on him. He's gotten really, really good at running the machines. Big picture in the net week, it's probably 20% of what happens in the shop. Greg's got a tip here for you on the double-faced tape. After stripping bark off some walnut, I found places where woodworms were in the outer sapwood layer. Any suggestions on how to make sure all these worms are removed or killed? Went over holes with a heat gun, but not sure if that gets them all. Boy, I don't know. That's a great question for, what's a bug person? Entomologist, is that right? Now Ginny's kind of a bug person. Do you have an answer for this? How can somebody for sure make sure that their material is completely bug-free before they're going to work with it?
You ask them.
If they no longer crawl out is basically her answer. You know, I think when stuff gets, I think when stuff gets kiln dry, that's part of the answer, is the heat in there is killing it. But on a using it at home basis, I don't know. I'd see if like a university in your area has an entomology department or somebody that you could talk to get solutions for this. So you're not necessarily just whatever, spraying it with insecticide or hitting all the holes with a heat gun or what? Oh, you look like you had something.
Set it on fire.
Best way to attach paperback veneer to plywood. If it's not a huge surface, I would do that with just yellow glue. Not a huge surface because you don't want the glue to get away from you. You got to watch the tack time. But yeah, yellow glue would be fine for that application. Conventional, like if we're in the Type Bond family, Type Bond original would do that. Larry Joe says, bought an old 12-inch Powermatic planer, cuts great. Need info on changing the blades and setting them. Can you recommend where to get info? So I would jump on. I would jump online, Google, and put in Powermatic planer, model number, owner's manual. It's amazing. Like I don't really know where this stuff comes from, but I've got a Simplicity snow thrower that's like almost older than me. Works great. And I was able to find an owner's manual for it online. Same with an old Toro snowblower. So yeah, I would just Google that model number and owner's manual and see what you can find. What's the best technique for making dovetails? Huge, it depends. If you want to buy a jig, it's hard to beat the ease, once you get the hang of it, of cutting dovetails with a router-based dovetail jig. That's probably my go-to. That being said, when I taught hand tool woodworking in Africa, and I had to learn how to hand cut dovetails, and I finally got that to work, there is something so cool about hand cutting a joint, and when it snaps together and it fits, oh my gosh, is that crazy rewarding. It's amazing. So there isn't really one good answer to this because it just depends on what direction you want to go with your woodworking. I can cut through dovetails on my bandsaw. That's another approach. So there's a lot of different ways. You got to just think about what direction you want to go with your woodworking. Greg says adding water when sizing a joint can cause excessive swelling. Yeah, that's true. I think if we're on end grain, I don't think it would be an issue because I don't think we'd get swelling out the end grain, and that's probably the only place I would actually size a joint is the end grain. But it'd be worth experimenting with it. Gary says, I have to say GOA has the most safety conscious videos compared to others I've seen. Oh, well thanks. Yeah, it's that teacher training. You know, I wanted to be a shop teacher when I grew up, so boy, did that get pounded into me in college, the stuff about just always erring on the side of being as safety conscious as possible. Charles says, I'm in the process of building a 4x8 mobile workbench. In your opinion, what would you say is the most important addition to the bench? Well, I don't know. So this bench here, Charles, is a 4x8 bench. It's pretty mobile. I've got it on the Rockler benchtop casters or workbench casters, and I'm beyond their weight limit. I think it's 400 pounds is the weight limit for that caster set, but they're still working. So I don't know. You know, a tour on this thing. I don't think it's got one most important thing because I love it all. This side is all drawers, and they're graduated from small to larger, so that depending on what I want to store in them. Putting drawers here was great because it let me eliminate some of my wall cabinets and it keeps stuff handier because I'm working at the bench. 2 vices because it's handy to have a vise where I can work crossways on the bench and long ways on the bench. So that's the long ways one, that's the crossways one. So I think you could start with 1 vise and then see how your work goes from there. These Rockler T-tracks I put in the surface, I love those. they're capable of accepting a lot of different stuff. That's only one thing. I guess everything else is in another drawer. So the T-tracks have been really, really helpful for me with hold downs, hold sideways. There are stops that'll also fit in there. So when I'm sanding, I can lock that in place. I can use that as a backstop. This stop is actually a Craig product. So the T-tracks have been wonderful. For the dog holes, I intentionally went with 3/4 inch dog holes because the other device that I really, really love is this product. This is a Bessie product. It goes into the 3/4 inch dog hole. And then does that. So that hold down, very, very rock solid, very fast, very easy to use. And then on the other side of my bench, and I'm not laboriously spinning around, on this side then I've got open shelves. And that's where I've got my daily use portable power tools and that kind of stuff. So I don't think I've got any one you must have this kind of a thing, but those cumulatively make for a pretty good bench for me. Chris says, to kill the bugs, put the pieces in a black trash garden bag, close or seal it, place it in the sun. Well, there you go, you're making a kiln, basically, right? You're raising the heat inside that bag and that's gonna kill the bugs, that's good. Cleston says Rockler has a 90-degree angle bracket. Oh yeah, it's here. Hey George, could you look by the Shopbox CNC, and I think it's silver. It's a Rockler product. It might be in the drawer where all the router bits are. I got it with the intention of trying it as a location device on the CNC. Yeah. And I haven't experimented with it yet. But this is the other thing with that T-track, is that is a relatively new product from Rockler. So that can slide in and then lock us in at 90 degrees, so provide an inside corner that you could bear stuff up against. You know, imagine if I'm assembling a face frame and I get a corner in here, and then I can have a Craig hold down clamp also here, like this. Boom, squish that down to the bench. What a great way to put face frames together. Sammy says, could you tell us the process for drilling the dog holes in your workbench? It was very boring. What? Here's what I did. I'll tell you what not to do. On a workbench that I built about 10 years ago, I thought, I own a plunge router, and I own a 3/4 inch router bit. So what I did was, on the drill press, I drilled a pattern with a series of holes in it, just kind of like this, in plywood. And then in my plunge router, I put a guide bushing that was like 1 inch diameter. So my idea was, I basically, this is a portable drill press, right? I'm going to put the guide bushing in the hole in the plywood, and I'm going to plunge and get these holes that are then perfectly perpendicular to the surface. The problem is, the bench is so thick. This bench is 2 inches thick. That bench was about the same. That if that thing wanders at all, it very quickly elongates the hole, and the whole thing went really bad, really fast. It's not, it was nowhere near the cool, great way to make those holes, I thought. So on this bench, what I did is I took a piece of hardwood and I think I had, well, I think it was about 1.5 inches thick, maple like this. I took this to the drill press, made sure the drill press was set perfectly square. And I drilled a 3/4 inch hole in this piece. Part of the key to this, I think firmly, is using a brad point drill bit. Coming right back. Is using a brad point drill bit because they tend to wander less. See you, George. Have a good weekend. So brad point drill bit, it's got a distinct center point. So at the drill press, I drill this hole, which is now perfectly perpendicular to these faces. I take this to my workbench, and on the workbench I've laid out those hole locations. So I allow this to project through that hole until that point is on the hole location, then I clamp this to the workbench. So what I did is I made a drill guide. So then just using a handheld drill, I can follow this, drill the hole in the workbench, and it ends up perfectly perpendicular. And on this bench I have, I don't know, a lot of holes, 30 holes. I think I used 3 guide blocks. So in other words, just from me hand holding a drill, I maybe get it a little bit kittywampus and I start to wear the sides of that drill guide. So it's going to take more than one of these to drill a lot of holes. But that worked really well. Got the holes nice and perpendicular to the face, which is important for the dogs, and was way better than that plunge router experiment. Thomas says he heard crickets, like heard crickets because it got really quiet. You're saying that as an expression, or literally heard crickets? Because we do have crickets in the shop. Greg says UJK PARF system makes really accurate drillings, makes a festival style table. All right, I'll have to look that up. Hey, could you, or Jenny, could you run and get that bowl off of the sanding table there? I'm going to show them, we're going to do show and tell. Because this was kind of cool. This was yesterday's woodworking. That would be so funny. So I turned this yesterday. And people who watch my Instagram are not allowed to guess what wood is this, because I showed this on Instagram yesterday and I said what kind of wood it is. So extra bonus points if you know what kind of wood this is. It's very heavy, it's very dense, it's close grained, it's beautiful in color, dark heartwood, yellow sapwood, grows primarily in the southwest part of the country. It also, in addition to getting used for woodworking, you might use it if you're making a steak. So this is mesquite, and this is the first time I've ever worked with it, and oh my gosh, I'm thrilled. I am so happy with the material. It's crazy dense, it's unbelievably heavy. It turns like a dream because it's so close grained. Now, that being said, mesquite has a propensity to be just a little bit chippy. So you have to keep your lathe chisels very sharp. It's also a very hard wood. So I did probably 80% of this turning I did with carbide tip chisels, and then the rest I did with high-speed steel bowl gouges and fairly frequent sharpening on those high-speed steel bowl gouges. So it's a hollow vessel, which means it's undercut here. It's undercut here on the top quite a ways, as far as I could reach with a chisel. But I just love the look of this. I've actually got a second piece of mesquite waiting for me to get to, and I can't wait to get it on the lathe. It was really a blast to work with. David got it right. With my mouse. Randy says, Got a 1412 Laguna bandsaw and resaw 8/4 cherry, oak, and hard maple for scroll saw projects. What do you recommend for blade width and TPI for the best cuts? I use, so I'm assuming you're on kiln dried wood. I use a 1/2 inch, 4 tooth per inch Timberwolf blade for that. And if you, the people at PS Wood, which is just pswood.com, they are so knowledgeable. They're the ones who distribute Timberwolf blades. If you call them and say, here's my saw, here's exactly what I'm doing, they're going to give you a bulletproof, recommendation for blades. So I'm pretty confident that they're going to tell you 1/2 inch, 4 teeth per inch. However, it's worth a phone call just to double check that, and I think you'll be good. D. Fowler says pros and cons of Harbor Freight clamps. You don't say because I don't know because I don't own any. I don't own any Harbor. I think my only Harbor Freight product is an electric welder. It's a wire feed welder. Because that Chicago Electric is the same, right? Is that true? I don't own any of their clamps, so I don't know. Carlos says, on the subject of turning, is there any difference between a spindle and roughing gouge other than the sharpening profile and a great mesquite bowl? Thank you for the compliment. Difference between spindle and roughing gouge. Well, they look way different. So let me go get one. You guys stay where you are. Okay. There's a spindle gouge. There's a spindle gouge. There's a spindle gouge. That, my friend, is a roughing gouge. So much more deeply fluted. Now don't confuse a deep fluted spindle roughing gouge, this, with a deep fluted bowl gouge. They are not interchangeable. So big difference in how they look. This roughing gouge, I mean, one, by virtue of its size. Let me grab a smaller one. I know I own it. Okay, you'll have to trust me. By virtue of its size, it's going to remove wood. There it is. This is going to take wood off. This roughing gouge is going to take wood off a lot faster than that spindle gouge. I also find I can get a truer cylinder, so fewer high and low spots with the roughing gouge, because you're actually using, am I messing you up here?
No.
You're using this part of the gouge with basically holding it on its side. So that allows you to get a good, true cylinder out of that. Where, of course, with a conventional gouge, we're probably rounded on the end, so it's harder to get a true cylinder out of that. So I'm going to rough with this, get as far as I can, and then detail with this. So look at the question again and see if I actually answered it. I keep setting my mouse down. Where's the mouse? Difference between a spindle and a roughing gouge other than the sharpening profile. Okay, so we talked about that. Chris says, what do you recommend for the thickness of maple edge banding around a 42-inch radius table? Ooh, experiment. 42-inch diameter. I bet you could do 3/32, maybe an eighth, and I'm going to guess not much more than that. 42-inch diameter. Yeah, I think it's going to be fairly easy to bend, but you're going to have to just experiment and see what you can get away with without it going south on you. But I bet you could do 1/8 inch. And let's see, I'll see if I can show you something cool here to wrap up. And Carla says, how about a bowl gouge? Let me run and get a bowl gouge. They're a little bit different. I'll get this following here. So there's a bowl gouge, spindle gouge, roughing gouge. Do not try to shear on a bowl with your spindle gouges. You could use a bowl gouge on a spindle. It's not very practical, but you could get away with it. But you can't use spindle gouges on a bowl. It's that deep flute and the tip profile are what let us get away with that. Let me talk about that banding a little bit. Because when I put solid wood banding on a guitar, or binding, and in order to make that work, I had to bend it more than it wanted to bend. So this might help you with what you're looking for. This is hot pipe bending, is what this is called. Let me get stuff. Oh, you know we're gonna have, no, maybe not. Okay. So here's how this works. Pretty well. 2-inch galvanized pipe, 12 inches long, on a flange. The flange is screwed to this plywood gizmo. The plywood gizmo is such that my propane tank can go here, but I gotta put a different head on the tank. So it's designed actually for this setup. But I need that one, stupidly, I need that one to light this one. If I reconfigured this, I mean this looks crazy, if I reconfigured this, this could go in here, but it just happened to get built for this. What's going to happen is the pipe is going to get really, really hot. And then, let's see, Ginny, could you go in under the sink in the break room? There's a spritzy thing of water. And we'll see if we can get this hot enough. We'll see if we can get a pipe or a piece of wood to bend. I'm going to rip a piece of hardwood. This is ash. That might be a good example. So, piece of ash, barely wants to bend. Yeah, I don't know if we'll get the heat out of this that we want in the time that we have left. What happens is when this is hot enough, you get the wood wet, and in the perfect world, you soak this piece overnight in water. So I've actually got a piece of PVC, 4-inch PVC pipe that's very long. There's a cap on one end of it that's glued on, a cap on the other end I can remove, so I can fill that with water and then I can stand banding or binding up in it. Spritzing an area like I just did, this is how I did the guitars, the binding for the guitars, is I only spritzed the area I wanted to bend. And it's getting there. Alright, so this doesn't want to bend, but then you work it over that hot pipe with your clamp such that this won't fall off the table. And just keep giving it a little bit of down pressure. Make sure it stays wet. This is a race that goes to the slow and steady, not the swift. Because if I force this, of course, I'm just going to break the ash. But what will happen here over time is as the heat starts to take effect, this piece will start to bend. And it's amazing when it works correctly because you can feel it in your hands. It's like heating up a piece of steel to a point where it's red hot and then bending it in a vise. This is a really, really cool thing to know about in super low tech. I mean, it's such an easy way to bend a chunk of wood. All right, this is like as fun as watching paint dry at this point, but you get the point. So over time, as this gets hot enough, I'm confident that this 1/4-inch piece of ash I could bend into a pretty consistent U shape. I can feel it. I can feel it starting to relax in my hands right now. So if I just kept working this, there it's already got a little bit of a bow just by sighting down it. I can see it's got a little bit of a bow in it. So then it's just more of the same. I'm going to go back and look and see if there are any more questions from you folks. And then we're going to end our hour. All right. That's the premise. It's very hot. Okay, a couple questions came in. Greg says, gonna make an assembly tables using parf. Okay. What size pedestal for a 38-inch by 54-inch oval? Well, I don't know. 38 by 54. I don't know. I'd have to get in SketchUp and mess with a drawing. Yeah, I'm not sure on that one. Sorry, Chris. Randy, what is S2S selector better? I bought for $1 a board foot. Good for you. Tim says, does MAP burn too hot to use for pipe bending? I don't think so. I've never used it, but I'm assuming you can just close the valve a little bit. If it's scorching the wood instead of giving you the opportunity to make it malleable, close the valve a little bit. So you could try it and see. I've always done it with the propane, so I'm not sure. All right, folks. Well, that wraps us up. Now, I want to mention a couple things. Once again, thanks to Typebomb. 2, thanks to Sam, Tyler, and Ginny for being behind the scenes. A month from now, the second Thursday in November. This is going to be really cool. I'm going to be broadcasting, not from this shop, from Matt Cremona's shop. If you're not familiar with Matt's work, you should be. He's a good hand tool guy. He's a great logs to lumber guy. Everything he builds in his shop, he builds from lumber that he cuts, he dries, he uses. He built his own bandsaw sawmill. He built a trailer that he can haul logs on. So we're going to be live from his shop that Thursday. I can't remember the date. Second Thursday of November. We're going to be live from Matt's shop. So be sure and check us out. Other than that, we are done for today. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Boom.
Boom.
Turn it off. There we go. Just turn off. No